Hello, everybody, and welcome to the tip of the Ice-Burgh Live as I fix all the graphics that I had just messed up before we went live. Your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. Let me get this back on track here. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, and we got a great show for you guys today because, well, we're talking about last night's loss, a game in which I thought the Pittsburgh Penguins played much better than they had in previous matchups against the New Jersey Devils. I was actually encouraged by the way that they performed against their division rival, but alas, they fell short. They didn't get the job done. They lose 3-2 in fake hockey, which is what I call the shootout. And it continues what is a very worrisome trend for the Pittsburgh Penguins. We'll get into that to open the show. We have an injury update for the captain, Sidney Crosby, who missed practice today at UPMC Lemieux Sports Complex with an upper body injury. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. We'll have our 3 stars of the week segment as we do every single Wednesday live stream. And then, as we always do, we'll answer all of your questions at the end of this show. So if you're tuned in live at Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube, make sure you drop a question in the comment section. We will get to all of them at the end of this show. Let's kick things off with what we saw last night. It was a rough last couple of minutes for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's just put it that way. They were able to bounce back in the game, but then at the end of the game, they kind of lost all that momentum. Going into overtime, they had a couple opportunities. They weren't able to finish on those opportunities, and then it went into a shootout in which we all know the Pittsburgh Penguins were not going to get the job done in the shootout. They advanced to 1-5 in that frame this season after battling back from a 2-0 deficit in that game. I thought that they looked good. And that's how I started off this show. That's how I'm going to continue to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins yesterday. They obviously are not going to have the foot speed to keep up with the New Jersey Devils. They're not going to have the team that's going to be able to handle the New Jersey Devils. At least they haven't over the past couple of years. But as we saw last night, the game went on and the Penguins adjusted more so than they have in previous games, previous matchups against this Devils team. They pushed back from down 2-0, like I said. I thought they pushed very hard when Crosby went down in the third period, which is what we'll get to in a couple of minutes. Kevin Hayes continues to be a nice story. He pots the game-tying goal in the third period, and it felt like, okay, match that performance to that point with the fact that the Penguins had won 3-0, got their first shutout victory of the season on Saturday over the Nashville Predators, and they played very good defensive hockey. And you said, maybe this is a turning point. Maybe they come back, get a victory over the Devils, a victory that not a lot of people expected on a Tuesday night, and they come from behind without their captain, and they get the job done. Well, 2 different things happened after that. Sidney Crosby did return to the game and finish off the game, and the Penguins lost in a shootout. So while it is disappointing, while it is just another Metropolitan Division loss, it was one in which you looked at and said, all right, if the Pens can play 65 minutes the way that they played the New Jersey Devils last night, they're going to be able to compete against the best teams in the Metropolitan Division, which is going to be paramount moving forward. The Penguins are now 3-8-4 against the Metro. Last night was one of the best games that they played against one of the better teams. I think you can look at probably their game against the Washington Capitals early in the season, which was at this point a very different roster. And you can look at last night as probably the 2 best matchups, the 2 best games that we've seen from the Penguins against the Metropolitan Division this season. And yet they're still 3-8-4, which in reality is 3-12, which is a 20% win rate. It's awful. It's not good. To say that they have struggled against their own division would be putting it lightly. They have a winning record against exactly one opponent in their division, and that is 1-0 against the Philadelphia Flyers. And why is that important? Well, if you look at what's left on the schedule for the Penguins, 11 of their remaining 27 games are against the Metropolitan Division. If they keep the pace they're going at right now against the Metro, that'll put them at 2-9 in those games. 11 of the other 16 that they play are against teams tied or in a playoff spot as of this moment. The schedule is not going to be easy for the Penguins down the stretch. And that is why I look at this and I say, if they cannot perform well against their division, they did so last night, but that has been the exception and not the rule for the Pittsburgh Penguins this season. But if they can get over the hump, if they can't get victories against their own division, there's a good chance they're staring down the gun at a top 5, not top 10, not top 15, a top 5 draft pick going into the 2025 NHL draft. As of right now, the Penguins are 25th in the NHL, which would give them the 8th overall selection. They're 4 points ahead of being down low enough to be 4th overall in the 2025 draft. When you look at the schedule, when you look at what the Penguins have done all season long, not just against teams that are above 500, not just against teams that are currently sitting in a playoff spot, but against teams in their own division, there is a real reality, especially with their 2 best players currently banged up, that the Penguins end up landing one of the big 4 in the 2025 draft. And that's whether it's Schaefer, Misa, Martone, or Hagens. It looks like there's a really good shot that they're going to get up close to getting one of those top 4. I hope I'm wrong, because as I stated last week on this live, I would prefer to watch winning hockey. I understand that it's probably better for the organization as a whole to go on that trajectory and to finish with a top 5 draft pick, to finish with a one of those 4, whether it's Schaefer, Martone, Hagens, whoever it is. It's better for the franchise and better for the future for them to do that. But I don't want to watch crappy hockey for the rest of this year. So I'd rather see them be able to compete, be able to do what they did last night and stay in these matchups and make it interesting against a good team like the New Jersey Devils. It's going to be hard to do that without Sidney Crosby, though. And that's where I'm going to go next. Sidney Crosby left yesterday's game after a weird collision between Erik Haula and Luke Hughes of the New Jersey Devils. He left. It looked like he was in a lot of pain. He missed a couple of shifts, and then, to a roaring applause, he returned to the ice. Something that I think everybody collectively let out an exhale with, not just in Pittsburgh, but think about how many people north of the border heard that news, saw that news on X, on Twitter, on social media, wherever, and said, oh no, we just lost what was going to be one of the best pieces of Team Canada for 4 Nations. If you're in Pittsburgh, you don't give a crap about that. You give a crap about Sidney Crosby being available, being healthy, and being able to play in a year where he is the main attraction. He is the only reason, or one of the few reasons, to go to PPG Paints Arena this season, especially for the remainder, as they're looking to potentially sell over the next 4 weeks. He goes down due to injury yesterday, and everybody gets worried. He comes back. I felt good. He finished the game. He looked like he had a step in overtime. Of course, it was an upper body injury. Looked like his arm got caught, which is what he said later in the day, is that his arm just got jammed up in between those 2 players. He comes back. I get excited. I think, all right, he's all right. And then we hear reports today that he misses practice at UPMC Lemieux Sports Complex. Now, the Penguins did have 2 days off in between games. The next time they go onto the ice is against the New York Rangers on Friday. And then, of course, the Philadelphia Flyers on Saturday will round out their pre-4 Nations schedule. So maybe it's just a day where he gets maintenance. That's what everybody was telling themselves. Well, according to Mike Sullivan, with reference to Penn's Inside Scoop on Twitter, says, quote, once we have more specifics, I'll let you know, but he is being evaluated for an upper body injury. We all know what the injury was. It's his arm. I believe it was his right arm whenever he got caught up with those 2 players, but we'll have to wait and see a little bit more as time goes on. Now, I don't know the practice schedule. I would imagine they're going to practice tomorrow, especially with a lengthy break coming up after the back-to-back on Friday and Saturday. So we'll see if he returns to practice tomorrow. But as of right now, being evaluated for an upper body injury, I think everybody in Pittsburgh is collectively holding their breaths, hoping that he is good to go, whether that be for the 4 Nations, but more specifically for the stretch run following the 4 Nations face-off tournament. So that's all we know right now on Crosby. Upper body injury currently being evaluated. We'll have to wait for more information from Mike Sullivan and the Penguins coaching staff over the next couple of days. Let's move over to the 3 stars of the week segment. This week, it mirrors a lot of what we did for the power rankings on Monday. And there's going to be some people that are going to say, well, why would I tune into the power rankings if you're just going to do the same thing on Wednesday? Well, because the power rankings are a cumulative ranking of the entire season. If somebody does great over 3 weeks, that's going to bump them up in the power rankings. If somebody does bad for 1 week, it's not going to drop them all that much. Meanwhile, 3 stars of the week are the best 3 players for the Penguins over the past 3 games. And at number 3, I think there's nowhere else to go but the guy between the pipes. Alex Nedeljkovic has been very strong this week. 2-0-1 record, a .947 save percentage, and the first shutout of the Pittsburgh Penguins season on Saturday, saving all 25 of the shots that he faced against the Nashville Predators. Not only that, you look at what he did last night. He shut down Jack Hughes on multiple breakaways, half breakaways, grade A opportunities. Nedeljkovic got the better of Jack Hughes, so much so that in the shootout, fake hockey, Jack Hughes whiffed on his shot. So Nedeljkovic got the last laugh there as well. So Ned winning a battle against Jack Hughes is nice, even though the two other goals that were scored were via Jack Hughes. Ned getting the last laugh was good, but he's stolen the net once again. He did it late last season from Tristan Jarry. Jarry opened the door just a little bit because he got sick and missed that game in New York. And Alex Nedeljkovic started and never gave it up the rest of the season. It's not going to happen that way this year. There's no chance in God's green earth that he's going to do that this year because there's just too much time left in the season. But he has stolen the starter's net, and it doesn't look like he's giving it up anytime soon. Not only is he in the same position that he was late last season, being the number one guy, being the undoubted starter, being Mike Sullivan's first and only choice in a lot of these matchups, he's playing much better now than he did late last season when the Penguins went 8-3-3. So the question is, if you're somebody that wants to see them make a push, if you're somebody that wants to see them get close to or even get into a playoff spot, the goaltending is there right now. The defense needs to step up. More specifically, the goal scoring needs to step up if they want to start collecting wins and want to start moving towards that goal of making the playoffs for the first time since 2022. I think that looking at the schedule, I talked about it already, looking at the schedule and looking at what the Penguins have done against those teams collectively all year, it feels more realistic that they're going to go in the opposite direction, but that's not going to be because of Alex Nedeljkovic. He has been very good. Like I mentioned, .947 save percentage. If you look at last year, when they went on that run, his save percentage was sub .905. It was not good. He was just battling and doing just enough to get the Penguins the victory. He's doing way more than that over this past week. He's been very good, and he's 2-0-1 in that time because, well, he's backstopping a team that had, up until now, Sidney Crosby playing at an elite level. We'll get to Crosby in a minute. Second star of the week is going to be Rickard Rakell. I mean, what a week for the Swedish kid. What a week. Named to Team Sweden, which I think was a long time coming. We talked about that on Monday's episode. But then he adds a goal versus the Devils. He scored two technically, but one was taken away for a clear and distinct kicking motion, which it was. But he comes back, he scores a huge goal late in the second period to give the Penguins life, because I think we all agree, and I think it was Colby Armstrong who said it on the broadcast last night. If they wouldn't have scored late in the second, it would have been a very, very tough hill to climb in the third period against that Devils team down multiple goals, especially for a Penguins team that has struggled to score. So a huge moment, a huge goal in a huge moment, I should say, for Rickard Rakell on a beautiful wraparound to beat Nico Daws. Not only that, the guy has been a facilitator, 3 assists in his last 3 games. So playing over a point per game pace and still well on his way to a career high in points this season. That goal last night was his first in 6 games, which was his second longest drought of this season. He had a drought of 9 games back in November. So hopefully that turns something on for Rickard Rakell. Hopefully that flips a switch for Rickard Rakell, and he can get a couple more goals here before the Four Nations break against the Rangers and against the Flyers. And that brings us right now to the number 1 star, a guy that we mentioned earlier, a guy that is currently up in the air when it comes to his injury status. Sidney Crosby gets the number 1 star of the week. 5 points in 3 games, 2 of them being goals, 3 of them being assists. He's currently riding a 5-game point streak with 7 points in that time, and he's leading the only consistently decent, and I mean decent, offensive line for the Pittsburgh Penguins. If you look at the last 10 games played at 5-on-5, Crosby on the ice, the Penguins have scored 8 goals. With the other 3 forward lines on the ice, the Penguins have scored just 6. So Sidney Crosby wheeling and dealing, creating more than 50% of the offense for this team in their last 10 games. He is the number 1 star of the week as he continues to age like a fine wine and continues to put together another very, very impressive season. Third star of the week, Alex Nedeljkovic with a .947 save percentage. Second star is Rickard Rakell, who's over a point per game with 4 points in 3 games. And the first star of the week, 5 points in 3 games, the captain, Sidney Crosby. Let me know in the comments section below who you have as your 3 stars of this past week. But we're going to take a quick break. When we return, answering all of your questions. So if you got one, drop it in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can before we head out today. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh, live on Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube. So make sure you like, share, subscribe if you enjoyed this video. But as of right now, we're going to head to the comment section to answer all of your questions. So if you got one, throw it in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can before we head out of here today. Let's kick things off with Evan, who wants to talk a little bit about last Friday's trade. Says, are you disappointed that the Penguins didn't get Höglander back in the Canucks trade? And would you have preferred Höglander over the first round pick? I was a little surprised because I thought any trade involving the Penguins and Canucks this year was going to involve Nils Höglander. I thought that he was going to be the prospect coming back in return for Pettersson, but I also didn't expect Pettersson and O'Connor to be shipped out on the same trade call. So that trade kind of surprised me in a lot of different ways. Didn't expect a first round pick to be coming back alongside anything for Marcus Pettersson. So I would have still rather taken the first. You know, Höglander is a good piece that we've been talking about a lot. Somebody who needs a fresh start, somebody who fits what the Pittsburgh Penguins have been looking for, a young guy with a lot of skill set, with a lot of upside that just hasn't been able to reach it and seems to have kind of stalled out with his current team. But with that said, I would still much rather have a first round pick, especially since it's a first round pick from a team that currently is, I believe, in 12th in the draft positioning. I want that pick. Top 13 protected. We'll get to that in a minute. But a team that, if they get even a little bit better, you still might end up having a top 20 pick on top of the one that you're already going to get, which, as we talked about early in the show, is not unrealistically potentially a top 5 pick. So I like Höglander. I've been talking about Höglander, you know this, Evan, all year long, but I am still much happier with the first round pick in this return. It surprised me, but I would still rather take what the Penguins were able to get in this one. Let's go to Peter, who says, do you think the Penguins retain Glass and Tomasino in the offseason? I'd be surprised if they didn't. I think the Penguins really like what they have in both Glass and Tomasino, and that goes to show whenever you see the opportunities a lot of these guys have. If you look at Cody Glass, he was out there a lot during the overtime period. The Penguins just trust him in the faceoff dot. They trust him on the penalty kill, which we saw a lot of yesterday, and he's been a guy that's been playing, again, the lines are a little weird because they don't really have a second or third line. Mike Sullivan said as much as, listen, we have Crosby's line, and then it's 2 second lines or 2 third lines, whatever. They're the same line. It's the middle 6, Crosby's line, and the bottom line. That's what the Penguins are right now. But Cody Glass being the center of one of those lines, I think shows you how much they really enjoy the way he's progressed this year. And it seems to be that they're interested in bringing both of these guys back as of right now. I'd be surprised if they didn't. Let's go to Evan, who has another question here. Says, also, reportedly, the Penguins are open to trading Anthony Beauvillier, Kevin Hayes, and Blake Lizotte. What are the potential returns for these players? I'm not surprised that they would be open to trading Beauvillier, Hayes, and Lizotte, honestly, because right now, where the Penguins stand, the phones should be open for pretty much everybody not named Crosby or Malkin. It's probably not open for anybody that has a no trade clause, because Kyle Dubas has said on multiple occasions that he hasn't, and he's kind of alluded to the fact that he probably won't ask anybody to waive those clauses, whether it's modified, an 8-team, a 10-team, or a full no-move clause, which is the case with guys like Karlsson, guys like Letang, guys like Brian Rust has a full no-movement clause until July 1st. So it doesn't surprise me that they'd be open to trading guys like a Beauvillier or a Hayes. The returns for these players are not going to be very much. Maybe more so for Lizotte. You probably get the most back because he has that other year left, and because he doesn't play much power play too, and he's not going to on any contending team, but he plays a lot of penalty kill. He can play at the center ice position. He can also play at the wing position. He's kind of done all of it. So I think his return would be more so than the other two, but I think that you're looking at a mid to late round pick or a B- at best if somebody's desperate for one of these guys, but more so you're looking at around C prospects in return for any of these three. Let's go over to Flux CC, who says, with Gino and Sid hurt, we have 1C Kevin Hayes, 2C Cody Glass, and 3 left wing Matt Nieto. How good are one of those big four going to look in the black and gold? I'll tell you this. Adding one of the top 4 in this year's draft to your draft pile, I know that a lot of people are saying, well, compared to 2024 and even compared to 2026, the 2025 draft is not great. That is exclusively after the top 4, and even you can argue after the top 10. The top 10 are still going to be very good, and the top 4 are still going to be extremely good and immediately become one of your top 2-3 prospects upon their draft to the Pittsburgh Penguins. I still think that you would consider Rutger McGroarty higher than any of these guys. I mean, again, I haven't watched extensively all 4 of these, but right now I'm very high on Rutger McGroarty because of what he's doing. But yeah, they'll look really good in black and gold, or they'll look really good for their junior team with a Penguins logo by them anytime you go to look at their stuff on Elite Prospects. So yeah, if Sid is out for an extended period, which again, nothing that they have said has led to the fact that that might be the case, we have to just sit back and wait. Gino, I expect to be back by that first game post Four Nations faceoff. If they do miss time and if these injuries do continue to kind of hamper them for the rest of the season, yeah, it feels like one of those top 4 are going to be looking to come to Pittsburgh at some point here in the next couple of seasons. And Flux CC has another question, so let's get to that. Hypothetically, let's say the New York Rangers first that we own ends up being number 15 overall. Do you use it to pick, or do you flip it for someone that can come into the lineup immediately? That's all depending on who's available, right? Let's look at some of the big names right now that could be available via the trade market. Do you use a first rounder to go out there and get one of the big Buffalo Sabres young players that are on the board? I don't know if Bowen Byram's worth trading a first round pick at this point because of the way that he is played. Not only that, but because of the position that he's in. The Buffalo Sabres have to either pay him or let him walk. I don't think that's a situation where you would spend your 15th overall pick. I don't think Dylan Cousins is worth a first. I think the conversation gets interesting right now with Trevor Zegras, but I also think that you carry it into the offseason and you see who else is going to look to make some moves. Because with the salary cap jumping, people are going to make some moves that are going to be surprising this offseason, whether that's to open up more space so they can make that big splash signing, whether it's Mikko Rantanen or I believe Mitch Marner's contract is up at the end of this season, which is something I want to double check here before I continue because now that's at the top of my mind. Yeah, Marner's contract's going to be up, so maybe somebody trades a $6 million player or a $5 million player to open up that space, and you can utilize that first to get them plus some. But I think that as of right now, until you see the full board, I would want to hold on to that because one player to me, depending on the player, again, if you bring in Rantanen, then it changes things. But one player to me is not going to make this team a contender next year. I think I would rather hold on to that 15th overall pick and pick twice in the top 15 this year to help the future of the franchise and not next year, because immediately would be nice. But again, immediately, is it really going to help them be a contender next year? Unlikely. Let's go to Brandon, who says, Nick, if Sid is hurt and placed on IR, which is the worst case scenario, who takes the 1C? It's just kind of a bigger version of what we're seeing right now. There's no bona fide first line at that point. It's just, we have a bunch of third lines. You're the Seattle Kraken of the Eastern Conference if that happens. I would imagine that you probably place Kevin Hayes there, because he's the guy that took the spot yesterday whenever Sid missed a couple of shifts. It was Hayes between Rust and Raquel. So I would imagine you bump Hayes up there. That way you keep Cody Glass with the guys that he's been playing with on the second line, which is Michael Bunting, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Anthony Beauvillier. And then I think that you move Blake Lizotte up to third line center, bump Noel Acciari over to fourth line center, and wince, because it's going to be a rough couple of games. I don't think Sid is going to be placed on IR simply because it looked bad. But the fact that he came back into the game and he didn't look like he was laboring at all late in that game makes me believe, personally, again, just my opinion, that he's not going to be on IR, that he's not going to miss extensive time. Matched with the fact that they're going on a 2-week break here in a couple of days, I think that if anything, you might lose him for 2 games. And again, Malkin, you're only going to lose for 2 games. But if Sid does not play, that's what you're looking at as the center ice option is Hayes, Glass, Lizotte, and Noel Acciari. And again, you wince and brace for impact whenever that's the case. Let's go to Logan Rose, who says, saw a report that said Elliot Friedman thinks the Penguins are shopping the Rangers first rounder. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but yeah. What would that return look like? Would it be a Trevor Zegras? I think that's the type of name that you're looking at, like a 25 or under star that needs a fresh start. And that's Trevor Zegras. It's not Mitch Marner, because Mitch Marner is going to be a free agent, so you're not going to have to trade that away. But I think there's going to be more names that kind of pop up as the offseason starts to get closer, as the trade deadline comes to an end, and as the playoffs start. Because once the playoffs start, these other players are still looking to kind of make some noise and tell everybody, put the league on notice that they're looking for a fresh start. Vladimir Tarasenko did it. I think it was before game 1 or the day before game 1 that he was looking to go, and then he ended up getting traded. So I think that's when you're going to start to see the board kind of create itself. I think Zegras is one of those names that would be interesting. I wouldn't love giving up a first, but I would love having Trevor Zegras. So maybe that's the cost. And right now the Penguins have a surplus of first round picks, which is a first for them in a very long time. The last time they picked twice in the first round was 2012. And the last time before that was 1984. So it's been a while, and the Penguins need to build for their future. So would I rather them keep it? And yes, unless somebody crazy comes up, Zegras might just be above that line. Let's go to Pittsburgh Heather, who has a goaltending question here. Says, I don't understand the decision to send Jari down if it's only going to be Ned's net. Why not keep Blomqvist playing at the AHL level? Why have him sitting instead of playing? I don't think this was the plan. I don't think they planned on it being specifically Alex Nedeljkovic's net. I think Mike Sullivan's doing what he always does. He's riding the hot hand. That's what he's done for years. It's what he did when it was Murray and Fleury. It's what he did when it was Murray and Jari. That's what he did when it was Jari and Casey DeSmith from time to time. But right now, they sent Jari down because he wasn't playing at an NHL level. He needed that factory reset, that quote-unquote full reset that Kyle Dubas called, sending him down to the AHL. And Blomqvist wasn't the only person that they wanted to see in a different spot. Let's not forget that either. They wanted to see Sergei Murashov pulled up from the ECHL, where he had been absolutely dominating opponents, to the AHL level to see what he's able to do there. So it wasn't only Blomqvist, it wasn't only Jari, it was also about Murashov and putting people in the right position. Murashov moved up to the AHL. Blomqvist will get opportunities, but you're not going to take out a goaltender who's at a .950 save percentage or a .937 save percentage in his last 6 or 7 starts. You're going to run the hot goaltender because he gives you the best opportunity to win. We're going to see Blomqvist get an opportunity this weekend, and then we'll see what happens whenever they come back from Four Nations. Maybe Ned has cooled off a little bit. If he has a bad game, it's probably going to go back to 50-50. All right, it's Blomqvist's chance, it's Ned's chance, and until somebody heats up and becomes that hot hand, it's probably going to go to that singular person. As of right now, Nedeljkovic has just been too good to take out. Whether Blomqvist deserves a chance or not, you don't want to take out a goaltender that's playing as well as Ned. Blomqvist will get opportunities, though. Don't worry about that. Pittsburgh Heather also says, right now the Rangers are 11th in the NHL draft order. Is it better for them to stay there for the first round pick is it better for them to stay there so this first round pick rolls over into next year? We had a very long conversation about this on yesterday's episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. So if you want like comprehensive thoughts on this, Heather, you can go back and check that out. But the short answer is yes, it is better because the draft next year is much deeper and considered much more talented than the draft this year. I'm not sure where the Rangers are going to finish next year because they've been a volatile franchise for years now. Last year, they were in the Eastern Conference Finals. They were a President's Trophy winning team. This year, they've struggled to get out the gate, and there's still no guarantee that they could get back to where they need to be and get back into a playoff positioning. So they're having a bad year this year. So what are they going to be next year? I don't know. They've kind of repurposed their team a little bit, bringing in JT Miller, trading away Jacob Trouba, trading away Philip Hedl, being able to retain Alexis Lafreniere, and that trade was big as well. But I think in general, when you're looking at that first rounder, it's better for it to roll over to next year, not only because the draft is better, and if you choose to make the selection, there's a higher chance that you hit on that selection. But if the Penguins were to miraculously pull a Washington Capitals, and I think they're far way off from being able to do that exactly, but if the Penguins are back to being better next year, you have 2 first-round picks to play with if you want to bring somebody in. So I think all in all, it is better for the Penguins to get it next year, unless there's a crazy scenario and a chaos scenario that happens where the Rangers finish top 10 and say, you know what? We want that first round pick next year because it's a better draft. And because we think we're going to be better and we want to be able to play with that first round pick in 2026, and they give it to the Penguins. Unlikely scenario, highly unlikely scenario, but one that would benefit the Penguins if they ended up picking twice in the top 10. I would give that like a 2 or 3% chance of happening, but there is a chance that it happens. Non-zero chance, as we always say on this show. Let's go to Christopher Hart, who says, do you think Anaheim is dumb enough to take Raquel for Trevor Zegras and Cutter Gauthier? No, I don't. I don't think they are. Not only that, I don't think they're taking back Rickard Raquel. I have no idea where they feel they're at in their rebuild, but it should be the get up and go time for the Anaheim Ducks. It just hasn't been this season. Look at all the young talent that they have, not just in their prospect pipeline, but specifically NHL ready and playing well at the NHL level. They have Leo Karlsson. They have Trevor Zegras, who's starting to try to figure out how to play a 200-foot game. They have Cutter Gauthier. They have some stud defensemen. They have Mason McTavish up there. This is the time. This is when you stop being a team that misses the playoffs and you actually push for that spot. This year wasn't that year. So you would have to imagine with the cap going up and them being in that position, at least as somebody who's on the outside looking in is thinking they are in that position, they're going to buy this year. They need to figure it out. They need to start bringing in players that are going to help advance them to the next step. Raquel would be that type of player. I don't think that they're going to take Raquel back. And hey, certainly, I understand the facetiousness in this question. They're certainly not dumb enough to take him back for both Zegras and Cutter Gauthier. Although Cutter Gauthier playing for the Penguins against the Flyers would be very fun to watch. Very fun to watch. Let's look at some of the other questions here. Bradley Vision says, what about Laine? Should the Penguins inquire about him if he keeps falling down the Habs lineup and getting benched? Laine, personally, I wouldn't touch Laine because when he's great, or when he's good, he's great. But when he's bad, he's non-existent, and he comes with a massive cap hit. And I want to look this up to get the exact numbers right. But this is just a guy who, for a bevy of reasons, has struggled to find consistency at the NHL level. He's been really good. He's been a 40-goal scorer, but I don't want to pay $8.7 million this year and next for Patrik Laine, especially if he's going to be inconsistent. And like I mentioned, when he was good, he was great, even this year for the Montreal Canadiens. But that's not a risk that I'm willing to take for 8.7 in a year that you're only going to have really maybe one swing, if that, to take to try to add to this NHL roster next year. Dubas isn't going to go all in. He's not going to make 2 or 3 swings to get this team back to contention next year. If anything, he might make one, and I don't think I'm taking that swing on Patrik Laine. Let's go to Nas26, who says, why not trade Bryan Rust? He holds the most trade value. Doesn't his trade protection end after the season? Tell him he either goes now or before next season. That's not a way that I think the Penguins have ever operated, and I don't think they're going to start now. But yes, his trade protection goes from full to, I believe, nothing next season. Yeah, there's no trade protection after July 1st. So you can trade him next year, but as I mentioned, Kyle Dubas has stated that he hasn't had a conversation with anybody that has a trade clause about waiving it. I don't get the sense he's going to have that conversation, so he's not going to trade Rust. Why not trade Rust? For the simple reason that you need to have somebody to play at the NHL level. You need to have somebody to ice a competitive roster, and Bryan Rust is a guy that deserves respect because of what he's done in the city of Pittsburgh, to at the very least let him play out this year and then reassess where you're at going into the offseason. I think that you can make the argument about Raquel that as of right now, and Jesse Marshall of The Athletic tweeted this today, so I want to give credit to him because he put the thought in my head. Raquel's getting to the point where you say, we wanted to keep him from Crosby, but that value is starting to get awfully high, and it's starting to kind of equal out to what it will be if you wait to the offseason, whenever there's one less year and a lot more millions of dollars under the salary cap. Raquel's an interesting conversation. I just don't think they're going to have one with Bryan Rust. I think that his full no movement clause is going to be honored because that's something the Penguins have done and want to continue to do under Kyle Dubas. Let's go to Pittsburgh fan 412, who says, it's not so much the returns for these players, it's opening spots for the baby Penguins. I did like this comment, wanted to kind of highlight it. I would love to see a handful of players get an opportunity, but I know that it's not going to come at the same time late this year. I think you're going to see 1, maybe 2. If you want to include Owen Pickering, it's going to be 3, because I think Owen Pickering is going to finish the year at the NHL level. But I think outside of Pickering, you're going to see 1 or 2 players get the opportunity, because I think 1 or 2 of the roster players right now in the Penguins are potentially out the door. And if they're not, what's the use of having a pending UFA Matt Nieto in the lineup over a guy that you can give a chance to, like a Ville Koivunen, or even like a Jonathan Gruden, who hasn't gotten a chance this year? That's where I think you start to see some of these baby Pens. You're not going to get it in wholesale waves. You're not going to get, oh, here comes Ponomarev, Koivunen, and McGroarty. They're all going to get the last 10 games of the season. You're not going to do that. 1, because it's just not feasible in this current lineup. And 2, because the Penguins are only going to have, I believe it's either 4 or 5 call-ups post trade deadline. And they're going to have to keep some of those in their back pocket in case you have injuries to defensemen or forwards where you need to make those call-ups. So it's not just emergency. So I'd like to see some Wilkes-Barre-Scranton guys get opportunities late in the season too. But then again, if you go to the Penguins website and you click on Kyle Dubas's latest press conference, he talked a lot about, we like what they're building down there. We like the way that they're playing together. We like the way that they're starting to build chemistry together. He might elect to just keep them down in the minors, down at the AHL, and let them try to go on a run this year for a Calder Cup or potential Calder Cup run in the postseason. I wouldn't be surprised if Pickering comes up, like I said. I wouldn't be surprised if one of those 3, Koivunen, Ponomarev, or McGroarty, gets an opportunity late this season. Probably more so a Koivunen or a Ponomarev than a McGroarty, but it is something that you're going to start to see late this year, and it's going to carry over into the beginning of next year. Let's go to Evan, who says, what are your thoughts on the Graves-Desharnais pairing? And what do the Penguins need to do with Heinen to get better performance out of him this time? I think Danton Heinen's looked pretty good in his first 2 games. He was one of the few bottom 9 players to get a grade A opportunity outside of obviously Kevin Hayes, who scored that goal. And he had a lot of opportunities on Saturday as well. So I think Danton Heinen has looked good. What they need to do to get better performance out of him, exactly what they did his first year in Pittsburgh. He scored 18 goals. They got great performance out of Danton Heinen in his first year. What did they do that year? They set him up with good line mates. I'm not sure how great of line mates you're going to get right now, but let him play consistently with two other guys, and I think you're going to see some pretty good results out of Danton Heinen. As far as Graves, Desharnais, they are what they are. They're a third pairing, and certainly neither of them should be moved up from the third pairing. Desharnais so far, yeah, he's big. That's what he is. He plays physical. He does. I had a lot of people in the comment section in the reaction to that trade saying he doesn't play physical. He's a marshmallow. He doesn't take runs at people. He's not Boko Imama. He's not going out there with the express purpose of making a huge body check, but he plays physical. He's cleared out the net front well in the first two games that he's played, and he hasn't been absolutely awful with the puck on his stick. Now, he's never going to make a great play with it, but as long as he makes the right play, he doesn't have to worry about making a great play. And I think the same goes for Ryan Graves. He's what he's been all year this year, which is better than last year, still not good enough to put into the top four, but somebody who, for the most part, isn't going to get caved in third pairing minutes against bottom sixes across the league. So they've been all right. It's been 2 games. It's a very, very small sample size. It's a pairing that the ceiling is not that high, but if they can compete well and play consistent, it's a fine bottom pairing. Some people forget that the Pittsburgh Penguins watched Cody Ceci as a first pairing guy for some time. People forget that the Penguins fans had to watch Jack Johnson get paid a massive contract. Erik Goodbranson get an opportunity here. Dmitry Kulikov play, I think it was like 2 games or something like that. They're not surprised by the Penguins bringing in a bona fide, not going anywhere other than third pairing type of defenseman that doesn't move the puck well. That's what Desharnais is. He is what he's going to be. And he came over to the Penguins in order to get a first round pick. So it's fine. Let's go to Blues Nation, who says, do you think Boko could keep a spot on this fourth line? If he does what he's continuing to do, I don't see why Mike Sullivan would take him out. As of right now, it's not like the Penguins are flushed with options for the fourth line. I'd rather see Boko Imama out there than Matt Nieto. 1,000%. So as long as he continues to do what he's doing in a very, very limited role, remember, he's not playing more than 5, 6, 7 might be the max a night. If he goes out there and makes an impact in the 6, 7 minutes that he gets, I think Mike Sullivan's going to put him out on the ice. As long as he's not a detriment to them defensively, he's going to keep getting opportunities, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So I think he's going to continue to get chances here until he falls off, because once he falls off, they'll just supplant him with Nieto as a placeholder, or they'll bring up somebody else like a Jonathan Gruden, who's a good fourth line option in the AHL. So I think as of right now, he's done nothing to warrant getting taken out of the lineup. So yeah, keep him in. I like it. Let's go down to Bradley Vision, who says, how would you feel about a Graves-Zadorov trade? Bad contract for bad contract. Let me look up what Nikita Zadorov's contract looks like. I believe he is with the Boston Bruins right now. He is in year 1 of 6 for $5 million. I hate it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Bradley Vision, but I hate it because as of right now, that's more years at more money than Ryan Graves. I don't want to bring in Nikita Zadorov at, I would imagine he's over the age of 30. He is 29 years old. I don't want to bring in that guy until he's 35 at $5 million. I understand that right now Ryan Graves has struggled, but Boston's not going to do it, and I don't think Pittsburgh's going to do it either. I'm not interested in going tit for tat to bring in a guy that is not as great. I mean, it's weird because Zadorov had a really good playoffs, whether that be I think it was last year, but at the same time, I'm not willing to pay that much money for another old defenseman. I'm just not, especially on the left side where you want to see Owen Pickering get chances, and then you want to just kind of build from there. So I wouldn't bring in Zadorov. I wouldn't clog up the left side with that contract, even if it means getting rid of Ryan Graves. Although, no, I still think I'm going to go no on that one. Let's go to the Machine TV, who says, Do you think it's almost 100% likely that they trade the UFAs, Matt Grzelcyk, Bo, and Rax? Rax is not a UFA. Rax has, I believe, 3 years left on his contract. So I think it's unlikely because everybody's saying it's unlikely. I mean, yes, we're getting to the point where you have to look at it and say his value is getting very, very high. Maybe moving on from him now is going to garner a better return than it would in the summer, but it still feels unlikely. I'm just going to echo the sentiments of Josh Yohe of The Athletic, of Rob Rossi of The Athletic. They have been very, very adamant that it is unlikely that he gets moved this season. If they're that adamant about it, I'm not going to be the one to sit here and say, yeah, but they're going to. Matt Grzelcyk, I don't know, because right now, who do you put with Erik Karlsson? And I understand people that want to see the Penguins tank are going to say, who cares? That's going to make them worse. That's great. But the Penguins aren't going to actively tank. And right now, the best fit with Erik Karlsson is Matt Grzelcyk. So I don't know if they're going to trade him, especially after moving off of Marcus Pettersson. Beauvillier feels like he's a very likely trade piece in the next couple of weeks. It does. 4 weeks to go until the trade deadline. He's a pending UFA. He's 5th on the Penguins right now in goals, and he's playing really everywhere in the lineup. Now, if you trade him, you lose that piece. But you also have a similar piece in Danton Heinen, who can play in the top 6, who's played on both sides, and who gives you that offense without being bad in his own zone. So I think the most likely is Beauvillier, but I don't think that it's 100% that anybody is gone before the trade deadline, because look at last year. They wanted to trade a lot of players. They traded 3. This year, they're already up to 3 if you want to include Lars Eller, but I'm not sure how active the trade market's going to be. And I'm not sure how many people are looking to Pittsburgh to take off any of their pieces with the season that they've been having. Let's go to Jacob, who says, if the Penguins fall within the 5th to 7th pick this year, who do you think would be the best fit in the draft? I'll say the same thing I said last week. If you want draft conversation, if you want who the Penguins should draft and opinions on some of these prospects, I'm not the guy to ask right now. I am still in season mode. I haven't looked at very many, if any, of the guys in the draft this year. Go check out Jesse Marshall of The Athletic. He's done a lot of work already on some of these draft prospects and talks a lot about who he likes in the upcoming draft. He has a focus and an eye on that. I don't have an eye on that right now, so I can't speak on it. Sorry, Jacob. Let's go to Brian, who says, Yo, Belsky, what is the greatest goal in Penn's history? Lemieux in 1991. I would imagine that's when he beats Casey in the final. Game 1 final against the Stars, or Jágr in 92, Game 1 against the Blackhawks. I'm going to give the edge to Lemieux, because while Jágr's goal was huge in that game, while Jágr's goal is historic and it does land itself in the annals of history for the Pittsburgh Penguins, I believe it's on the mural up at PPG Paints Arena. It's one of the best. It's top 3. It's Mount Rushmore, no doubt. The Pens swept the Blackhawks in 1992. And while that could have swayed the entire series with a pivotal goal in Game 1, I still think the Penguins would have came out on top. Whereas Lemieux, again, it's not like they had a historic call home about series against the Stars, the North Stars in 91. That was the marquee goal, not just of that series or of that playoffs. It's the marquee goal of Mario Lemieux's career. One of the, he has too many, but it's one of the moments, the first 4 moments. If it's Mount Rushmore on Lemieux, it should be Mount Rushmore and number 1 for the Penguins en route to their first ever Stanley Cup championship. That's why I give the nod to Lemieux in 1991. I do like that question. I like looking back, Brian. Appreciate that. Let's go back to the Machine TV, who says, do you think we will see a McGroarty or Benstrom back up in the show again this season? Somebody commented this, and I have to explain. I have no interest in seeing Emil Benstrom at the NHL level. We've seen that. And people are going to say, yeah, well, he's an AHL All-Star. He's one of the highest scorers in the American Hockey League. He's one of the best players, one of the most consistent players, especially, that the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins have had this year. Yes, but when he's been in the NHL, he's faded into the background and often just been forgotten about. When he's playing 10, 15 minutes a night, maybe not 15, 10 to 13 minutes a night, he was forgotten about a lot of last season. I have no interest in seeing that, because I'd much rather see a Rutger McCrory. I'd much rather see a Vasily Ponomarev. I would much rather see a Ville Koivunen than see Emil Bemstrom, because in my eyes, this is a guy that's great at the AHL level and it just hasn't clicked at the NHL level. You know who else fit that bill? Jansen Harkins. And you don't see anybody saying, well, why was everybody so hard on Jansen Harkins last year? Emil Bemstrom's the same thing to me. He just is. And is he great in the AHL this year? Yeah. Kudos to him. I'm going to probably be watching a lot of AHL playoffs because the Penguins aren't going to be doing anything at that point, and I'll be rooting for Emil Bemstrom. But I have no interest in seeing him get a call-up over some of these other young guys that are knocking on the door. Let's go to Pittsburgh Heather, who says, is it more likely that Raquel is traded before the deadline or in the offseason? I'm going to, again, revert back to what I said before. I feel like he's going to end up getting traded in the offseason. It makes more sense. It's what a lot of insiders, Rob Rossi, Josh Yohe, are all saying, is it's more likely that he's moved in the offseason. It's unlikely that he's moved this year because, well, you need to have somebody to play with Sid. And while they do have Brian Rust, I think they want to have two guys playing with Sid. So at the very least, Crosby can have a good line, even if he's not on a good team. So I do think that as of right now, I would err on the side of those two, Rossi and Yohe, and say it's more likely to go in the offseason because that's what they're saying. And they've been adamant about it, like I mentioned earlier. Let's see what other questions we have to close out this show. Blues Nation wants to know higher ceiling. Higher ceiling, Koivunen or Ponomarev? I would say it's Ville Koivunen. Offensively, it's Ville Koivunen. I think that because of the season that he's had, and it's his first year playing North American professional hockey, he was really good, historically good in the Finnish league last year as a professional. He is one of the best rookies this year as a professional in the American Hockey League. When adapting to the North American style, it feels like he has surpassed Vasily Ponomarev. It feels like Ponomarev could be a very good third-line center, maybe potentially a second-line winger in the future, but it feels like Koivunen is a second-line winger and could potentially, if he continues to improve, go even further and maybe one day be a first-liner. Again, that's a little ahead of myself, but I think as of right now, Koivunen has jumped Ponomarev when it comes to who has the higher ceiling, just because he has been doing it and doing it at a very high level now for 2 consecutive years. Last year over in Europe and this year as a rookie in the American Hockey League. In my eyes, I feel like Koivunen has a higher ceiling just because I think he has a higher goal-scoring pedigree than Vasily Ponomarev. All-around player, maybe Ponomarev, somebody that can give you some PK time if need be, somebody that plays that 200-foot game a little bit better. But I think right now, higher ceiling overall to me is going to go to Ville Koivunen. Let's finish with this one from Kelsey. Knew we were going to get to this point, and we were eventually going to get a Mike Sullivan question. The Pens should not be this bad. Why is Sullivan still the coach? Because the Penguins should be this bad. You look at what the Penguins are this year. Outside of Sidney Crosby, who's still over a point per game, and outside of Brian Rust and Rickard Rakell, who are both having career seasons, there's not much to call home about later in the Penguins lineup. They've taken a lot of swings, taken a lot of bets on young guys. Phil Tomasino, Cody Glass. But while those guys have played well, they're not putting the puck in the back of the net at a consistent pace. Drew O'Connor fell back to reality and was not a good goal scorer before he was traded by the Pittsburgh Penguins. Kevin Hayes came over. Yeah, he's finishing opportunities. Yeah, he's been good on the power play, but at 5-on-5, he's not creating a heck of a lot of offense. The same goes for Michael Bunting. You know, Bunting has had a good season overall, but he's been a power play merchant. If you look at his 5-on-5 numbers, he's not contributing a lot of offense. Doesn't have a lot of assists. And 9 of his, I believe it right now, how many goals does Michael Bunting have? I think it's 13. Michael Bunting has 14 goals. 9 of them are on the power play. 5 of them are at even strength. So even Michael Bunting isn't performing goal scoring wise up to snuff at 5-on-5. The defense, don't get me started on how bad the defense was for the majority of this season. And then the goaltending. What we're seeing now out of Alex Nedeljkovic is 20 times better than anything we've seen before the last 3 weeks. That's how bad the goaltending was. Tristan Jarry has not been good all year long. Alex Nedeljkovic was not good most of the season. And you can't put very much on Joel Blomqvist. He's only played like 10 games. But even in those 10 games, he's been really good to start. He's been a little bit worse in the second, and he's struggled a little bit in the third period. Not all on him, but partially on him. The Penguins are not a good team. They should be this bad. They're not a playoff team. They have not performed as a playoff team outside of that stretch between Thanksgiving and Christmas. The Penguins have not performed as a playoff team. So as of right now, being 8th in a conference in which you win a couple games, all of a sudden you're 12th instead of 16th or 15th in division, that's where they stand. They're just not a good team. So they should be this bad. I'm sorry, Kelsey, but they are. And that's why Sullivan's still the coach, because expectations weren't high. And I don't think he's falling too short of what everybody thought they were going to be. So Mike Sullivan's the coach right now. I don't see that changing this year. I don't see that changing going into next year, unless, again, they bottom out completely and lose 90% of their games the rest of the season and look like they've quit on him. Unless that happens, which I highly doubt it will, Mike Sullivan's going to be the coach again next year. And it's all because they weren't expected to be good, and they're not good. So what do you expect Mike Sullivan to do with a team that's not that good? I understand the frustration, and I understand you say, so the last 4 years don't count. They do, but the Penguins held on to him through then. And now, what are they going to get rid of him for? Right? He hasn't fallen short of expectations this year, which is why it has not changed since they reinforced the fact that he's their guy last year. I can't tell you that I wouldn't have fired him 3 years ago. I can't tell you that I wouldn't have fired him 2 years ago. Personally, I would have. But the Penguins didn't. And coming into this year, they said he's their guy, and nothing this year has changed that fact. They haven't performed poorly enough compared to what their expectations were to change that fact this year alone. That's all I'm saying. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Iceberg. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Iceberg. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Or you can check us out anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.